Hello, and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Bryant Francis. What are the 100 most influential games of all time? That's a question that the folks behind the Polaris Game Design Retreat sought to answer with a new document gathering responses from 167 game development professionals. At the top of the list, Valve's Portal from 2007. At number 100, Origin Systems Wing Commander from 1990. Elsewhere on the list, you'll find Spelunky, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Sid Meier's Pirates, Katamari Damacy, Disco Elysium, Mule, and a number of other celebrated titles. Now, we all know gamers love making lists like this, but why would game developers, who are generally interested in learning from every game they can and not necessarily wanting to rank them for quality? This week, we're joined by Kitfox Games founder and CEO Tanya, who also co-founded Polaris. We're going to break down the most interesting picks on the list, talk about how game designers can benefit from studying it, and maybe share our own secrets about what games we find influential. And Tanya, welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to chat with you again.
Yeah, it's always great when we cross paths. Let's start. Before we can talk about the 100 most influential games of all time, we need to talk about the group that made the list and the sort of conference, which is Game Design Retreat, is what it says here on my other window, that you're a part of that created it, because we've covered a few things out of Polaris a few times, but I don't think we've ever gotten to explain to our readers and audience what it is you guys do and how this came together. So to start off, could you tell me about the Polaris Game Design Retreat, how it came together, and sort of what the main output is, I guess?
Polaris is a nonprofit, volunteer-run retreat that happens every year in the fall in Montreal, or in the outskirts of Montreal. And it's invite only. It's the way Daniel Cook always likes to describe it is summer camp for game designers. It's 3 nights. And in those 3 nights, it's a think tank structure where designers sort of have an unconference. They decide what design problem they want to look at together, and they put together a solution or their research into that topic together over the weekend. They gave a little presentation at the end of the time together. And then in the months following, they write up a report, which some people call papers. They take different forms, but basically they are resources that hopefully the broader design community can use. And I was one of the co-founders of Polaris because we had experienced this kind of format before, but we wanted to, first of all, see it here in Quebec for our own convenience, but also partially because there should be lots of these kinds of things, I think. For an art form like game design that's not particularly well understood at large and is actually probably 20 different fields all collaborating together, I think there is not enough, I don't know if formal is the right word, but deliberate and intentional cross-company research, thinking, and just idea sharing. Thankfully, I think our industry is a little bit more open to cross communication than, some other industries. But there is still a lot of fear and a lot of corporate question marks around why this kind of thing would be profitable. And we're not sure it will be. We don't want the pressure for it to be profitable. We're not trying to make a product for once. It's for a few days, really just think about a design problem that's been interesting you and a few other designers. And typically something really fruitful comes out of it. I think I'm extremely proud of the 20 or so reports that are there from the few years we've been running Polaris. And so this list was sort of me looking at all of those amazing designers that have come to Polaris and thinking, I have this resource. And every designer has their own sort of canon of what they think is the most important games. But what would happen if I asked all of them? And I was kind of inspired by the British Film Institute's. They have a Sight and Sound list that they do every 5 years of the most influential films. Now, they call it the best films, but everyone, I think, understands it to be more artistic than that, because film sort of skews that way anyway with the way they talk about their medium. And so, yeah, it was mostly my own curiosity that I thought, well, if I took 100 or more designers and asked them what would be their top most influential games, what would those actually look like? And I thought I would have an idea, and it turns out I was wrong. The list is very surprising to me.
Yeah, we'll get into the list in a bit for just a little bit more of talking about Polaris for a sec, because I feel like putting some of what you guys do into context helps inform that the word influential in the list, right? Like, you guys are trying to document what are hopefully, like, quote unquote, I'm doing giant air quotes here for the listeners, true things about game design, and anything in game design is only as true as it is for like 5 seconds. So I understand what I said is flawed, but like, right, like, if we're going to talk about influential, what is it influencing? It is influencing the ideas of making games.
Professional practice and craft of designing a game, of developing a game. Like the first year, for example, 4 of the example reports, one of them is about design practices for pro-social multiplayer. What are some guidelines that we can find together for how to make rules and designs and systems that encourage people to be genuinely kind to each other, not just like filling a mechanic, but actually feeling that mystical feeling of kindness. Another one was tools for empowering the relationship between theme and mechanics. So narrative designers were very curious about how you could connect those two things. What is ludonarrative, basically? Another one was about how to visualize systems. So there was a bunch of brainstorming and thinking and research into, if you have a very complicated system, how do you pick the best way to visualize it? And another one is a playful narrative. We have a lot of narrative ones because narrative designers like to talk a lot. But
oh my God, it's so true, said the part-time narrative designer. Yeah, I think when I look at this, it's very dangerous to sort of say like anything in game design, like that can be boiled down to like a spreadsheet that you fill it in, but also it's better to at least try and document these concepts than just rely on gut feel forever. Because if you rely on gut feel, then you're back to game directors who spend, 2 months spinning in their chair trying to figure out how to move anything forward, and the people with the highest level ideas can't help the people on their team who are super implement focused move forward. And I said before this call that I was excited to not talk about the game business for once and the business and production side of games, and I did it. I snuck into there. I'm stuck. Anyway, but yeah.
No, but I do think that a lot of games is about standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like, we're a very diverse industry. We have a lot of very different kinds of products and creations that are all trying to live next to each other under the same weird title of video game. Like, what actually is there in common between, I don't know, Candy Crush and Elden Ring, right? Like, they're very strange to think of those as the same medium when they're engaged with completely differently. Their form factor is different. I mean, everything is different. But a lot of times what happens in design is that we have to reverse engineer, where we're always sort of we're standing on the shoulders of giants, but without their permission a lot of the time. We're just trying to like study what they did and figure it out in retrospect. Whereas I think there are events like Polaris, but Polaris is one of these events that's trying to proactively build these knowledge bases so that it's not just reverse engineering. You can actually sort of understand the intent and do things knowing why you're doing them, not just copying another designer's results without understanding how they got there or why it works the way it does. Doing a deeper analysis than maybe is entirely advisable if your budget is super tight and you have to ship tomorrow. So it's like a little escape from production pressures. And it is a bit theoretical, but as someone who's involved in writing a few reports right now, like from this year, I can tell you that my group, we're working on a paper about designing for loss in games, because we were fascinated by the fact that designers love permadeath, and permadeath is extremely off trend right now. Meta progression is much more the hotness that is being built into everything. And like in a post-Balatro world, we're seeing more and more, quote unquote, exciting meta progressions. But we feel a resistance to that. And we want to make an argument for making more meaningful loss instead of just sort of papering over it with like shiny unlocks as a temporary measure. But again, that's a very like designer, like for designers kind of topic, but that's what we were interested in. And I'm excited to see if designers out there in the industry find our paper useful. That's what it's for.
Yeah. And you don't have to capturing the essence of one design process doesn't mean that, we have like meta progression is somehow like inferior or we're giving people a bad experience or whatever. It's just sort of like we can only know how to make these things when we've put some basic, when we've done the first step at trying to write an instruction manual for it.
Yeah. I mean, for like whenever we sit down and write a paper or even just sit down and think about a topic at Polaris, we realize part of the reason we're fascinated with it is that we don't even have the language to discuss what it is we're fascinated with yet. And so half of our time at Polaris inevitably ends up being, well, what are we actually talking about when we talk about permadeath? What is permadeath? What is not permadeath? And, you don't want to spend forever talking about terms, but there is this blind spot I think we have culturally sometimes as designers and even enthusiast designers, student designers. We take a lot of things for granted and we don't necessarily examine what our ideas mean or what standards we have in our practice that maybe need reevaluation. And I don't know, it's worthwhile, I think, as an artistic medium to think deeply about your craft and why you're doing it. And I hope this provides tools for that. And I think the influential games list is part of that. I'm hoping it will start conversations among professional designers for years to come about why are they influenced by these games? What influences them? And what does it mean to them for a game to be influential?
Yeah. Let's talk about the list then. We're going to get things started. If you haven't read the list yet, by the way, listeners, one, go check the show notes. Two, check gamedeveloper.com. There's something there linking it. But it's at polarisgamedesign.com. I'm doing everything possible to let you, the listener, have every opportunity to look at the list before we start talking about it. Not even from a spoiler thing, but just like, I don't know, don't want to jump scare you. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the number one game on the list in terms of the most influential game. It's Portal from Valve in 2007. Look, the cake is a lie. Speedy Thing goes in, Speedy Thing comes out. GLaDOS, everything on GLaDOS. I love this game. I would totally say it's influential. I would even say it's, if there were some kind of canon, right? Like, there's a film canon, like Sight and Sound, like beyond just like influence quality. Look, what I'm saying is I love Portal. How did it make it to the top of the list, do you think? Like, what did you sort of observe as it made its way to the top?
I think, so it wasn't on my list, to be transparent. I was not expecting Portal to be at the top at all. I think there's two factors. The first factor is that it's not a long-running series. If there were 12 Portal games, it might have been lower on the list. We saw there's a few different series like Zelda or Final Fantasy or a couple of other series that ended up being lower in the list just because they had to split all their votes among multiple titles. Like some people would pick one title as being the most influential, others would pick another one. So I think that's factor number one. And we did make a special series collapsed list for that reason that we can talk about later. The second factor, which maybe is more important, is the fact that it spoke to first-person shooters, which I think at the time some people had dismissed as like a hardcore only, it's just about murdering people. And it really was this eye-opening, hardcore but accessible to millions of people moment of showing how ludonarrative could shine in its own right. That narrative didn't have to be a bunch of text that you scroll through. Like, I mean, I love Planescape Torment, don't get me wrong, but that is one kind of storytelling. And then Portal is a very, very different one that I think opened a lot of designers' eyes. And Portal came out while I was in graduate school for game design, actually. And I think part of it is maybe, I guess, the third, if I could think it probably is the business part. I think the fact that the Orange Box and Steam was sort of wrapped up in the Portal launch is not insignificant, because I do think it reached more people as a result of that. Even if they didn't necessarily buy it, they still maybe played it because of what happened with Steam and the Orange Box and everything around that. I was required to play it as part of my school. Like, that by itself shows you how influential it is. Like, as soon as it came out, my professors are like, you gotta play this.
Yeah. How do you feel about a game from 2007 landing the top spot? And it's not the only 2000s game on here, with Dwarf Fortress from 2006, Shadow of the Colossus, and then there's even newer ones there. At the start of this, you guys said no games newer than 2019 to try and avoid recency bias. But 2007 is pretty... I mean, games were both a young medium, and also like 2007 is, past like a few decades of like influential games. So how did you feel about like a game from like kind of later earning the top spot, I guess, as opposed to something in the
I'm a little conflicted. I do wonder if maybe, and people have suggested this, I'm sure it's true for the film directors as well, but I suspect among game developers, there's an even stronger bias towards games that came out when you were between the ages of 13 and 22. Like, that is just a very impressionable to interactive media time in your life. And so I think if I had skewed my designers a bit older, maybe we would have seen older games towards the top. As it is, the fact that our average year on the list is the year 2000 probably indicates, we do tend to have slightly older developers. They're not students, these folks. They are professional developers. I didn't take any demographics data, but I can tell you by gut, I think almost all of them are over 30. And yeah, I feel conflicted. Portal is new, but it's old. And it's old for a video game. I do wonder if students today graduating from game schools, do they still study Portal? I don't actually know. I hope they do.
If I wander somewhere else in video games, all I hear is that Gen Z is making games in Roblox, and so maybe we shouldn't concern ourselves too much with what the youths are or aren't doing, because then we'll all turn into like opinion columnists of the newspaper. But yeah, like thanks for that perspective. Let's go to number 100 on the list of the most 100 influential games of all time, 1990's Wing Commander. Did you ever play this game?
Feelings about I have never played Wing Commander. Have you?
I haven't played Wing Commander. I'm sorry, dear listeners. But it's here.
Yeah.
I guess like when you were picking the list and you looked at number 100, like 100 can sort of be like, it's the bubble of like not being most relevant and being most relevant. So I guess like as you were talking with folks who are looking over the list, like what were some of your thoughts about this game like sneaking in down here?
It's funny because, everyone's heard of Wing Commander. Even though I've never played it. I do think there are some games on here, like right above it at number 99 is Pool of Radiance.
That one I've never heard of.
I'm not actually sure I've heard of it. Like, I might have heard it once because my partner is a retro game fanatic, but that would be the only context. Like, and I feel like that is typical of this, the dynamics of this list is everyone submitted 10 games. And inevitably, every single list would have a game that I had never heard of, or I'd never had recommended to me, or, I didn't know what they were talking about. And it was eye-opening at how diverse our industry's practicing designers are in terms of what games that they feel are important, what they feel inspired by, the things that interest them. Even now, I can't say I'm particularly compelled to go try Wing Commander, but I hope some people do. I should go check out Wing Commander. Pool of Radiance, just by the name, sounds more like something I'd be into, but I'm willing to try to pilot a spaceship. I assume that is.
Yes, it is. It's a starfighter game. It's sort of like we have X-Wings at home, but obviously I think it lands before the X-Wing games from LucasArts. I think, and I'm not going to go look it up right now because I don't want to clicky clack on a computer when I want to talk to my wonderful guest. When it comes to Wing Commander, so I haven't played it, but I'm familiar with it. And if I were to talk about even like its influence and its ranked influence is interesting in one part because in the early 90s, the flight sim genre was so huge and so powerful and such like a moneymaker in PC games. My grandpa, who was a like computer programmer, like very early computer programmer and like, was using computers until he passed. He would play flight sims. He had a flight stick. He was more interested in the World War II stuff. He got the X-Wing games to try and connect with his, like his grandkids. These and like first person vehicle based games have kind of slipped away, but the long DNA of like motion and working in these kind of like spaces for machines, I can see why it belongs here because even all the way to today, where sort of like the most times you control vehicles in games are either as a side activity or as or in a racing game, where I feel like this kind of aspect has sort of like either become granularized or so tied to real world appeal that it's not like fantastic anymore. Wing Commander like is definitely like, this junction point for controlling vehicles in games in 3-dimensional spaces.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't want to discourage people from taking this list seriously because I do think it reflects a certain fraction of reality. Obviously, I think if I were to redo this effort in a few years and involve more Europeans, I suspect more simulators would be on the list. I think there's a certain North American flavor to some of these choices, which it is what it is. I think it is still real, but it is regional to some degree. Whether which things we call influential, whether it's vehicular or RPG or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, even with British Sight and Sound, right? Like they can do their best to capture a certain, as broad an essence of films. But if you go into like, say, if you're talking to say like Chinese filmmakers who, Chinese cinematic history is in global cinema history so influential. Mm-hmm. But if you were to try and like boil down, the region and the era, there would be all these movies that like, not only have you not heard of them, you haven't heard of the genre they're in, you haven't heard of all these things. Like
you don't
like
know
regionalism.
Why they're interesting in the first place. Yeah, the Kinema Junpo list is also very interesting if you're into Japanese cinema. But yeah, I also think it's worth noting that, I reached out to probably over 250 designers. I did get over 150 responses, but the other 100 people, like, I don't blame them for not feeling like they had the time and energy to make the list in the first place. Most designers don't just randomly keep a list on hand of what their top influential games. It takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of reflection, and I'm not paying anyone for that. Nobody gets to headline. We do have the list of participants, which I think some people, if you look there's some very famous designers there, but that doesn't mean, Lucas Pope gets to go around and brag about anything. Like it's for the community. So I'm glad those 150 people did that, but it is just 150 people.
Yeah. What you are one of the folks I often sort of like check in with when I'm like, what's going on in like procedural system-based game design? So when you look at this list as someone with sort of your design interests and Kitfox's design interests, what is a game that stands out to you that either you're like, oh, of course that would be on here, or, oh, I didn't think that would make it on here, but this totally did influence me. Like anything stand out there?
Well, I will say I'm slightly embarrassed that Dwarf Fortress is so high. I swear to God that was not an intentional plant. I didn't bias it in the data at all. But it was much more listed as a direct inspiration than I was expecting. I expected Minecraft, for example, to be much higher than Dwarf Fortress. It's hard to say how much of that is because of like the creator, the two different creators having very different receptions in the game design communities versus the games themselves. I think it's very, very hard for designers to see games as separate from the author to a large extent. And so there is sort of an unspoken element there. If you happen to know a certain designer personally and you feel like they betrayed you, maybe you omit them from your list or something like that.
Yeah.
But I was glad to see NetHack was high up there, and Rogue, of course, is technically on there. I didn't think that NetHack would be so much higher than Rogue. I mean, I guess I could have predicted it, but
yeah, you could have, but
I didn't.
What
Mule?
What do you like
I was
about
really
NetHack?
glad that Mule got its day because that is absolutely a grandmother game, like a grandmother to so many different kinds of games that we have now. And it wasn't on my list either. This is again one of those situations where I was like, oh God, like I didn't even play Mule, but I knew it was one of the most influential games. Like it basically influenced everything I loved afterwards. So like I had a mud on my list, which there are no muds on this list because everyone listed a different mud, which means in the series collapsed list, there is an entry for muds. And yeah, Mule is just one of those, like, it was a very deeply procedural, systemic, simulation, multiplayer thing that still, there isn't something quite like it even now. And it's fun to think about how many designers were inspired by that game, even though they never played it.
Yeah. I had to let you talk about Mule there, but I do want to ask, like, so NetHack, what do you personally, like, not only enjoy about NetHack, but like what influences you about it, I suppose?
NetHack wasn't on my list either, but I mean,
it has to influence you somehow, though. Surely it influenced yeah. Anyway,
it influenced muds. It influenced lots of rogues. Yeah, I know. I played tons and tons of rogue. Like it is actually what most people think of when they think of rogue. I think these days. I think. If you picture in your mind what Rogue probably looks like, you're actually probably thinking of NetHack. And yeah, NetHack was just from what I understand, it's a triumph of crowdsourcing, I believe. I think it was a community project after a certain point. And also one of the first triumphs of sort of the almost early access forever kind of approaches, where there was no 1.0, there was no, and not a commercial game, really just a community trying to make the most fun, weird thing they could together and iterate together. And based on feedback and different people's interests and user stories really being the thing that drives it. Again, as a procedural oriented designer, NetHack was sort of the grandma for sure.
Yeah. I think something else as I look over this list is it's really interesting to see where games that I would confidently say, like Final Fantasy VII, oh my goodness, I had something else up here for that. Mass Effect, The Walking Dead. There are a number of games where the writing and the storytelling are some of the reasons, they ring so large in the public's mind. And I think they are very vivid reasons, that they stick in game designers' minds. And I think this is such an interesting tension in the industry, and it's not a tension that involves this word, the two words that I'm not going to say out word, but they start with L and D, where what makes a game influential is sometimes the craft of writing, but that writing could only happen in a game. So the writing isn't, it's load bearing, but it's not like the game is a vehicle for the writing. But also, when is a game as special as its writing is like something that I think actually matters because as a writer and someone who my friends are writers, there can be such a challenge for prioritizing a story in a game or words in a game. It can be a challenge not just with management, who may go like, oh, we're tired of like how long it takes to make written content. It can be a challenge with your peers sometimes too, when they sort of have positions on stories. So something I think about is interesting about this list is that, games with such strong scripts, where writers like got to contribute a lot, like have, I think, very well earned places here is what I would say. Like, like they don't dominate.
Yeah, it's almost alternating. Like 50% are these games that have incredible writing and systems to support that writing. If you look at the top 10, for example, you have Portal, obviously the Ludo narrative of all, right? And then the next one is Civilization. Like, okay, that's not, I mean, yes, you have a user story, but that's not the same thing. And then you have Dwarf Fortress, which again is user story. But then the next one, Shadow of the Colossus, has one of the strongest world buildings anyone's ever seen. I would call that writing. Slay the Spire, again, more user story, but then Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, extremely world building. Deus Ex is extremely, like, one of the top ludonarrative things to study of all time. And then we have Spelunky and Minecraft, which are user stories again. And then we have Outer Wilds, which wins its place it was my number one. I mean, I didn't have to rank my list, but on my list, Outer Wilds was on there. And specifically for that it told a story through the mechanics in a way that touched my heart in a way a game never had before.
Yeah, I hope that if we're talking about how a list like this or games like these can influence people going forward, I hope you can sort of look at a list like this and go, if you're looking at, some of these technically complex games, and sort of saying like, these are the things, that ripple so far because they're a player, they're what the player do. Like, I hope this list is sort of an anchor point for people to go like, hey, like people connect to stories and character in a game so much, and even if those aren't necessarily things you program or things that like have these big theoretical concepts, or it could be like whole worlds or advancements in like graphics processing power or whatever, or like I don't know, I think I raised that just because writers are both, I don't know, good stories and games are both one of those things, that make people go like, games are a medium like no other. And then also the people who write those stories like sometimes are tossed in the dryer a bit and tumbled around like while trying to make these stories happen. So I sort of, like you said, like the 50-50 nature of it, the like, no, not many story games right next to each other. It's like system, play, art, story, like the variance like is such a cool phenomenon to pop out here.
Yeah, it's always interesting because I feel like the designers at Polaris, for example, almost none of them identify as writers. There are many narrative designers. Some of them have books, so they obviously are writers. But almost all of us have worked on or led games that have very strong writing and very strong world building. And so that's a dance we have to do with our own expertise of saying, well, I'm trying to Ludo this narrative as best I can, even though my training is only in half of that word. Please, writer, think of it like a designer for a little while, and I'm going to try to think about it like a writer.
Yeah. Another interesting trend about, we were talking about before with Wing Commander about, like games and genres that influence other genres, but then the genre itself is just sort of like, not commercially supported currently. I'm not going to use the word viable because I sort of think you're like one lucky accident from any genre being viable or not viable. But, I'm sort of going to Warcraft 3 here and StarCraft that are on here. StarCraft is on here, right? There it is. Number 34. Warcraft 3. Yeah, it's actually very close to Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos. This is a case where we have a genre here, real-time strategy, right? And we have two amazing entries in the genre. I'm thinking back to when I was a kid, teenager, and real-time strategy games were everywhere. You had Age of Empires, and then this genre,
XCOM as well.
Sorry,
no, I was thinking tactical games, but yeah, RTS. RTS is a good example of a genre that isn't super populated.
Yeah, but it's interesting because like these games also sort of represent games where like there were two things in them. There was the campaign, and then there was the multiplayer, and those two things split off with multiplayer sort of surviving surviving in a certain sense, I guess. Like, it's not like, StarCraft 2 is, some degree still a popular multiplayer game, but like, or if the core package that we put it in together isn't, quote, commercial viable anymore, it's because these two things actually just don't go well together with players, and they're difficult to produce with players for what players want out of both single player and multiplayer. So it's just sort of interesting to see games on here where when you look at them, you're sort of like, what's wonderful about this game is that it's in two parts, I suppose. And those two parts influences like are actually very traceable out in different directions. Because I would say Warcraft 3, you raised tactical strategy games there for a second. Warcraft 3 single player definitely like shaped, so many great, interesting strategy games that came after it. They just weren't real time. And then meanwhile, the multiplayer became League of Legends effectively. So there's just seeing where one game can split different ways from entries on this list is so neat.
I think there's also a few games here that didn't spawn genres. They spawned multiple genres, or they're still waiting opportunities, both as an art form or as a business, whatever you want to look at it. But I know I've seen a lot of Star Control 2, passion projects trying to revisit that at number 21, there's Star Control 2. That was a very influential game that I played a lot at the time, that I think a lot of people now, like indies out there, are trying to rechannel that passion. But the one right under it, even number 22, is even more so. Sid Meier's Pirates is a game that came up way more often than I thought it would. And we can list that as one of the main, in terms of design, one of the main touch points for Streets of Fortuna, actually. I think anytime you're going to have a systemic RPG sandbox, you have to, or you don't have to, but ultimately you are harking back to Sid Meier's Pirates, because that's what that was. It was a sandbox, live your life with these constraints kind of systems. And there haven't been a lot of games like that since then. There have been, tycoon games. Life Sim, unfortunately, now means Stardew Valley. But it was really heartening to me to see that lots of people had put Sid Meier's Pirates, which makes me curious about what other stepping stones between that and in the future there might be. I feel like if there's Streets of Fortuna, there might be 50 other ones, right? Because it'll be unrecognizable to the random player. The average player will not look at Streets of Fortuna and say, oh yeah, this is a Sid Meier's Pirates game, right? Like, that's not the connection that will be made.
Yeah, I mean, that's also like almost all artists. No one looks at, God, I don't know, God, I watched a lot of movies and then they go, oh, that's totally like they riffed this from some other movie. And God, my father-in-law is often sometimes like, do you just ever enjoy movies? And I'm just like, man, I do this for games too, dude.
Yeah,
like,
no, it's just how some of us enjoy the thing. We got overeducated, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. Or
I think What Remains of Edith Finch also might climb the ranks over the years too. It's
yeah, I thought that was such an interesting one to wind up so high in the I hate the word, the walking simulator genre, quote, because it came out later than some of the other big ones on this list. I don't see Gone Home on here. I do wonder if that's another case of like the personality of the allegations made about the person making it shaped people's decisions. I did see we have Dear Esther here from earlier than Edith Finch. Mm-hmm. But when I think about the slowly paced game where you sort of walk through and explore an environment, like, to me, Edith Finch, which by the way is amazing, mm-hmm. It rules one of my favorite games, but I sort of see it as a game that like is a culmination of some other really influential games before it that just like they aren't here, and that's fascinating. And that's but it's it's like we said, it's just
some of these are like the beginning of a genre. Like, it was a really strong inspirational start to a genre. And then some of them, like Edith Finch, are almost like a capstone of a genre. That it's like the pinnacle of one family tree of how that design could be explored. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other forks, but I wonder if the type of inspiration, at least for me, the type of inspiration I get from Edith Finch is, what if I pursued a different branch down to its pinnacle and tried to make it as good as Edith Finch, but in this other design path?
Yeah. God, I love Edith Finch so much. Once the Halloween level hits and the rare John Carpenter score kicks in, I was so taken away. Like, that game was all like there's the fish factory, playing as the child, who in the bath.
So many memorable moments. Like I forget games almost instantly after I play them. I forget almost everything that happens. No offense to everybody I've forgotten in my life, but Edith Finch occupies a disproportionate amount of memories in my brain.
Yeah. Let's talk about one interesting challenge you guys had to solve that you note down here in what I love called process and errata. And I both love this. Look, process, like, look, how do lists come together? That's the thing we need to know. Errata, I'm like, wait, hold on. This is a word I see in my board games, in my war games. Like when I need to see the errata for one of my Star Wars Shatterpoint minis to understand the rules of the game, there's errata here. But one of the errata is that everyone listed or so many people listed Magic the Gathering that you guys were just compelled to put Magic the Gathering Online in here. And look, lists are made up. We can do whatever we want. It's a card game that bullied video gamers into getting on a video game list successfully. Just like Wizards of the Coast sometimes bullies people with Pinkerton Age. What? No, I didn't. Nope, hold on. But yeah, like, how did you feel about that? Like, I guess, like, no shade to Magic here. Some shade to Magic. I have so many friends the people I know who hate Magic the most play it the most in my friend group. Yes. So like how did you sort of like reconcile that, like, yeah, it belongs on this list even though it's not a video game?
Well, the way I reconciled it is this compromise of I put in a video game that I am positive at least 5 out of the 6 people that's not what they actually wanted to put. But I felt like it deserved a present. So I had a write-in bonus question of what would you credit as top influential non-video game? And I thought it would help diffuse this pressure that people would have to put. I thought it would be like Settlers of Catan, or like, I don't know, I thought a board game would probably pop up as like something people demanded to have on their list, even though it's not a video game. But it turned out it was Magic the Gathering, which makes sense in retrospect. But I wanted to reflect that. I wanted to show that really spoke to something in game designers and influenced the way they think about things. And I couldn't just, put it as a secret number 11 or something, or like honorable mention. I don't know. I figured since it can slot in the list, I'll slot it in the list and we'll just pretend it was a video game.
It's documented in game form. I think if for some reason, like, let's say someone got their wish and like snapped every Magic the Gathering card off the planet, Magic the Gathering Online would still be there, at least as a temporary like salve to like, how do I play Magic? Even though it's more likely the reverse happens, right? That like computers become more accessible than something physical. Maybe, I don't know. But like, even though the reverse is technically true, like at least it's there, right? At least there's a way to study it as a video game designer.
Honestly, I do think this is a helpful list for aspiring game designers or even practicing game designers. Myself, I feel like if I want to grow as a designer, I should probably work my way down this list to see which ones I haven't played or which ones I haven't played more seriously, right? Because some of these I've touched, but they're not my taste. And that's fine to a certain extent. But like, for example, I probably should play more XCOM. Like there's bones there that influence games I do love. So the fact that I haven't studied it probably means that I have room to grow. And that's true for a lot of these games. And it like, honestly, if there was a designer out there that was I was going to work with and they were going to work on a system driven game, for example, Fortuna, and they hadn't played Magic the Gathering, I'd be like, you probably should play a little bit of Magic the Gathering. It's really fundamental. And at this point, Minecraft, there's a few games like this that maybe it would be different if the question was, what top 10 games would you recommend to junior designers, which is not what I asked. That is not the question. But I do think now that we have these games are the building blocks of the modern game design practice, I do think it is a helpful list that some people can work through. I hope some people will take it as a wish list for what would be nice as a conversational basis, like a foundation for designers to talk around.
Yeah, if your team in any way like was sort of like, we're making this kind of game, and there's in your head at least there's like, we know what our modern touch points are. We know what games we played when we were younger that inspired this. this is the kind of resource, and it sort of speaks to what we were talking about earlier, but the other Polaris resources, which is like, look, this isn't necessarily like the best perfect way to document, to act as a reference point for this, but it is a reference point, and you could go through this and say, these games are like the game we want to work on, and then pick some other method, right? Like look at the games around those games, go look at the top games and stop and say, how does this exist in conversation with these games? And then add a couple of those like less obvious examples to your list, right? Like I truly wouldn't necessarily know how Load Runner from Doug Smith might fit into one of the dream games I have in my head. But maybe it does because I've gone and looked at like FTL or Chrono Triggering sitting nearby, because those are it. Like using just the physical space. Weirdly, if we're even getting to like, this is kind of a level, there's almost a little level design here of like, here's a way to help you navigate some games that might help you make better games.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I get asked pretty frequently how to grow as a designer. When you're a medium seniority designer and you feel like you're not getting that much out of watching talks on YouTube, there's not a lot to do besides make more games. Like that is answer number one, make more games. Okay. But like if a game takes 2 years to make, or 6 months even, let's be super ambitious and say you're going to make a game every 6 months, you're still only going to learn at a very slow pace at that rate. So being able to do things like go to game design retreats, if you're very, very lucky, read the reports if you can't, and yeah, do some research on your own, play some games outside your taste, play some games directly counter to your taste and your instinct, because there might be new little pieces of knowledge to bring back to your design nest that you can use on your next games. Because I think it's very, very clear as a junior designer how to grow. There's so many resources out there, so many videos, so many talks, so many books. But it's really when you're deeper in the craft that you need more than best practices. You really need some chewier problems. That's where I see there isn't as much knowledge right now on what to do in that case. And so I hope this is one more option.
Yeah, and this is an interesting conundrum alongside figuring out how you want to grow as any kind of artist, right? Like designer, musician, I'd say this non-jokingly, like as a programmer, as a creative programmer, as a like all these other interesting ways that careers with complexity can become arts that you grow in. Something interesting is that to pursue that is both like it feeds something in you, right, to start with, and then you go through this list and some part of you goes like, you know, a lot of people who worked on these things, like maybe they thought about that like that later in their career, but especially at the time they were making some of the most influential games of all time, they were just working stiffs. Like so many of these people were just, you know, like trying to make at the most optimistic, they were like, I'm in a position to make something I am very passionate about. I can see what I want to make. And, you know, I'd maybe put Outer Wilds there as like a clear example, right? But like, you know, XCOM, Civilization, not to knock Sid Meier there or any of those people. Like, I'm not trying to downplay these people, but there's just like, it's interesting how it's both worthwhile. And even if you never make an influential game, even if you never make a best-selling game, it is totally like one of the best things you can do in life is always try to grow yourself and always try to feed that instinct of like wanting to know more. But also like so many of the great works are also sort of like flashpoints in time by people at certain places in their careers. And this is all fine. And trying to understand that dynamic as an artist, I think, is also like healthy. I think it's very healthy because then it takes pressure off yourself because you're like, I can't control if I'll work on the most influential game of all time, but I can at least like connect with the people who did.
No, like comparison is the theft of joy for sure. It's very important, I think, as someone in a creative industry to figure out for yourself what motivates you and what your personal strengths and weaknesses are, whether you're naturally detail-oriented and naturally communicative, or are you more naturally people-oriented and you can do multitasking better than others and context switching, or, you know, there's just, everybody has different strengths, everybody has different weaknesses. And so the more you can know yourself, the more joy you can figure out how to get out of your work, and the easier it is to grow as a professional. or as an amateur, honestly. Even if I went out and got a different day job and I was just making games on the weekends, I would still be interested in growing myself as a designer and trying to do my best work for myself.
I'm going to cast a wide net with this next question, which is, when you look at this list, what is there a game on here that you look at it and part of your brain thinks, okay, I know why that's influential, and another part of your brain is thinking to when you played that game, and I'm trying to make sure I have the right words here, so if you roll with me. Is there a game on here when you look and you go, like, I can think of a moment in that game where I was having so much fun or such a powerful emotion that I really wasn't thinking at all about how important it was? Like, I was just doing something chaotic or stupid or whatever. Is there anything on here that hits that list for you? Like, is there anything, like, especially with some of these, like, super commercially successful games where my memory of it might be more like going, God damn it, as I tried to beat a boss over and over again. I guess that's what's in my head. Like, what's one of the, like, games here that you, like, have strong memories of the more banal moments, I guess, the more ordinary moments?
This is the problem of the list, I guess, and why I mentioned that I do think most of these entries are from when exactly these designers that I asked were between the ages of 13 and 22. Like, part of it is that you're young and impressionable, and part of it is that you're not a professional designer yet. I think there is such a thing as designeritis, that after you've been trained in it and you start playing it, you're not going to... Now, I mean, I just said Edith Finch obviously moved me in a few ways, even though I was a professional designer. But yeah, I mean, the ones on my list were often the ones I engaged with that way the first time I played them. Now, I would come back and look at them again differently later. But probably the oldest game on my list that I engaged with that way was Populous. And it didn't make it onto the 100 list. Not enough people said Populous. But to me, that was like the proto-civilization. Like, that was the systems, the mysticality, it was like a little bit like science, but a little bit like mythology and storytelling. And another one that is on the list actually was The Sims. The Sims, I went and I can brag here, I got to play Paralives a few weeks ago, and play test that. And again, I got kind of lost in the joy of it, like The Sims. It was like how I remembered enjoying The Sims back in the day, of really just going with the flow and like reacting to my character and their weird things they want to do, and like their family also melting down around them. I get so much joy out of The Sims, and I feel like there's something special in Paralives that speaks to that joy. Like, they've correctly channeled that. Whereas when I play The Sims officially now, TM, I definitely feel like, okay, I'm in professional mode. I'm going to look at what EA is prioritizing, because they did, I don't know, like, I haven't actually played The Sims TM in many years, because I feel this corporate overlord, like, watching me while I'm doing it. And like, I'm sure they're gathering my analytics, and I'm sure that they've focus tested every single aspect of it. Whereas, yeah, there's definitely a psychological element to that, but The Sims jumped out to me as an element on my list that was pure joy and also deeply influential to me as a designer, both.
Yeah. Very quickly, Paralives. So what team have you gotten to put? Who is behind that?
Paralives is based here in Montreal. That's how I got to know them. But it started with one guy, Alex Massé. And now they have a team of some developers here. And they just pushed their launch date, so it won't be out for a few more months. But they were supported by Patreon. They still are supported by Patreon. And they're doing very, very well. I'm so excited for them.
Yeah, that's exciting.
They have a zillion wish lists. It's yeah. Hopefully,
we're talking about a game of a list of influential games, and yet that just gives us cause to talk about games that aren't even out yet. I think I'll share a memory of like how one of the little ways these games influences me is Warcraft. We're going back to Warcraft 3 again. Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos, probably the Frozen Throne. I was a teenager. We're going back to that teenager bias again, but like it's I was bored playing one of the tower defense mods. I was clicking on some of the the units, and in tower defense games they take regular in-game units and turn them into buildings, kind of whatever. So they have the models and voice lines of real units, but but slightly tweaked for whatever themed mod you're playing. There were Pokemon tower defense mods. I think there was a Zelda tower defense mod I played. Like this was, or Super Smash Bros. Like this was all just charming, like, people playing with this kind of stuff. And I was clicking on the unit for reasons, just because I was like bored and waiting for the next wave to start. And then that was when I heard my first poke line, where you click on a unit enough times and it says like a little Easter egg line. And it said that, and I like jolted awake and I was like, what? Like, and then I went and found it on all the other units. And then I went, like, and it was just like, I played Warcraft for so many months by that point. I'd played like all this, and I suddenly found this thing deep buried inside that today, like, in some of the games I work on the side, like if I have a chance to make a poke system, I'll do it. And like, no other poke system is going to feel as fresh as the first one. It's so much easier to data mine games now to like find these like little Easter eggs and secret things, right? Like secrets are even harder to share as the internet has accelerated. But God, if we're talking about how like even just an ordinary moment can just feel like a jolt of lightning, like a little bit of fun. God, I love the poke system.
I guess the jolt from The Sims that I can immediately remember is actually this moment of self-reflection where I had named a bunch of characters after my dorm mates in college. And then one of them asked to kiss the other one, and I like shut down the game. And there was just this lightning moment of like, what am I doing with this game? Why am I playing it? And why did I have the impulse to name these people my friends? And who am I really? It cascaded this, like, what is the purpose of me playing simulation games at all? Like, existential moment. And I never booted that save back up again. I from then on, I only played fictional characters in The Sims. But it was definitely like, I don't know, almost Lynchian realization of like, I guess I had this impulse to play God or something. I don't know. But like their humanity is being impacted by this in some way that I'm not comfortable with.
It's funny, number 25 on the list, FTL, Faster Than Light. I definitely had a moment where, as I was trying to work through some emotions, I definitely like, for some reason, I was like, oh, what am I going to name my crew after? Because you can change the names of all the little crew units on your ship. But like, what am I going to name my crew after this run? And for some reason, I put a bunch of X's names down. Not out of malice, not out of anything. But I will admit here on this podcast that I did something as cringe as that in FTL. And I definitely, like, it's not the same thing as what you went through, because obviously there's no kissing mechanics in FTL. Maybe there should be. It's another case where just giving people the opportunity to name characters and things, which funny enough I can do now in a game I'm loving right now called News Tower. From which developer? I like making sure people know the names of developers when I raise games.
This is part of why teens are so open-hearted, It's like if you ask them to name a name, they're going to name one of their friends because they only know so many names in the first place. But then they are going to have very deep, complicated feelings about that name. Whereas I now know many, many more names, and many of which I have no feelings about.
Yeah. I was 24 when this happened, I should say, and for just to help out the News Tower folks, because this game rules.
News Tower
is by Sparrow Knight, from publisher by Twin Sails Interactive.
Okay.
Anyway, Tanya, we are winding down our time here, and I can also see behind you, as people in the YouTube version of this will see, that the sun is winding down its time.
Oh no, I didn't know people could see this. I'll turn on my lights. Yeah, the sun is setting.
Oh yeah.
Oh my. All right, that's better.
Yeah.
No, not haunting you anymore.
That is December. The sun is low. Like, we all huddle together around lists of the most influential games of all time for warmth.
Don't burn it for warmth, unless you have to.
Don't burn it for warmth. Well, yeah. I have been doing a thing. I've been trying to make sure we do a thing on this podcast where we sort of give like a chance to shout out to people in our professional lives who are sort of on our teams or whatever, who are, people who have been really helpful in the thing we're working on or what we're doing, who don't always get as much time in the limelight, who aren't as, extroverted as us people who go on podcasts. So Tanya, is there anyone it can be like in the list of designers who helped you make this list? Is anyone on Kitfox? Is there anyone who you'd sort of like to give like a little shout out today to, of like, hey, like this person's great, and you, the podcast listener, need to know about that?
Can I do two?
Games are made by many. Yeah,
Okay.
two's fine. Two's fine.
One, Mei Ling Tan is a designer at Bungie, and she helped co-found Polaris. And she is, like you said, not a spotlight seeker, not comfortable with getting up in front of people, but she was absolutely essential in Polaris existing at all. And she's one of the kindest humans on the face of the planet. And I just feel so lucky that she'll work with me on Polaris and continue to help grow it every year. And she might start one on the West Coast, but that's okay. It wouldn't be a betrayal. It would be a growth. And the other person I want to shout out is Graham Lennon, who also has been co-organizing Polaris from that first year. And he specifically did the web development on the list to make it possible for other humans to see it beyond just a spreadsheet. So thank you very much, Graham. And Graham also is indispensable in running Polaris every year. So it's my wonderful Polaris team. Thank you so much, Mei Ling and Graham.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Tanya, thank you so much for coming on the Game Developer Podcast. What is the next thing from Kitfox Games that you hope people are excited about? You want people to be excited about?
I really hope if you're into procedural stuff, user stories, Ludo narrative, world building, all that stuff, you'll check out and give me your thoughts on Streets of Fortuna, which is announced for Steam, but does not have a launch date yet. But we do have playtest signups by the time you're watching this. So yeah, definitely join the playtest, and maybe next year you can put your hands on it.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today,
Thanks,
Tanya.
Bryant.
Thanks again to Tanya for coming on the show. Whether you agree or disagree with the Polaris list, getting it together is a huge undertaking, and it's great that her and the rest of the retreat organizers are doing their best to better the craft of game development. For more from us on Game Developer, be sure to visit www.gamedeveloper.com, follow us on major social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Blue Sky at brianfrancis.me. Today's episode was edited by Pierre Landreau. Our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks for listening. My favorite game that's missing from the list? Richard Scarry's Busy Town for Sega Genesis, Macintosh, and MS-DOS from 1993. Just kidding. Or am I?